The morning after the ugly scenes at the Plaza Hotel and Wilson's garage, Nick goes to see Gatsby. After keeping watch in Daisy's front garden all night, Gatsby returned home by taxi at dawn. Daisy hadn't needed Gatsby's help at all. Nick advises Gatsby to go away for a while. People will come looking for him, and his unique car will be easy to trace. Even though Daisy was the one driving it, if push comes to shove, Gatsby will take the rap for Myrtle's death. Gatsby plans to stay put until he knows what Daisy wants to do. You never know. She might come to her senses and run into his arms any minute. He clings to hope. After all, their past affair was so intense, it had changed the course of his life. He'd been a penniless young officer when he first met Daisy in 1917, but he'd swept her off her feet. He'd also given her the impression that he too was from a rich family and could take care of her. Hey team, just a reminder, if you like this video, please hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. It really helps the channel out, and our next upload could be on something taught in your next class. Thanks, and back to the video. Their sizzling affair was interrupted by his departure for the war, but Daisy promised to wait for him. So Gatsby promised himself that he would turn his imagined wealth into a dazzling reality. But it turned out she couldn't wait. And by the time Gatsby returned to the US, she was already married to Tom Buchanan. Gatsby has convinced himself that Daisy loved him all along. She's just confused because Tom made him look bad the previous day. Poor Gatsby seems a bit delusional at this point, but Nick doesn't have the heart to contradict him. As he leaves Gatsby's house, Nick tells Gatsby that they, Daisy, Tom, and the rest, are a rotten crowd. Nick thinks Gatsby is better than all of them. But what about poor George Wilson, Myrtle's husband? Earlier that morning, before dawn, he'd formed a plan. He was going to find out who owned the car that killed Myrtle. Crazed with grief and sleep deprivation, he walks all the way to West Egg. The journey takes him hours, and at some point, someone gives him Gatsby's name. At around 3 o'clock, George arrives at Gatsby's house. He finds Gatsby lying on an inflatable mattress in his beautiful marble pool. Nick had been trying to contact Gatsby all afternoon. Sensing something was up, Nick rushes to Gatsby's house after work. His hurried arrival alarms Gatsby's staff, and they all run down to the pool. There lay Gatsby, lying peacefully but lifelessly on the floating mattress, surrounded by a thin circle of red water. As Nick and 3 of Gatsby's staff carry Gatsby's body towards the house, one of them sees something sprawled in the grass. It's George Wilson's body. What followed was a grotesque media circus. A coroner's inquest concluded that George Wilson was a madman killer, deranged by grief after losing his wife. But Nick wasn't really interested in any of this. He was more concerned about Gatsby. No one else had come forward to take care of Gatsby's affairs, so it fell on Nick. Less than an hour after finding Gatsby, Nick calls Daisy to tell her, but she and Tom have already gone away. Then he tries contacting Maya Wolfsheim's office, but no one is there, apparently. Nick can almost feel Gatsby's silent protests, so he goes upstairs to rummage through Gatsby's drawers, details of friends, relatives, anything, but there's nothing. Did Gatsby literally have no one? With the radio silence from Daisy and Wolfsheim, Nick starts to think this is the case. How sad. When Wolfsheim sends Nick a note excusing himself from helping in any way, Nick is disgusted. Then, about 3 days after Gatsby's death, Nick receives a random telegram signed Henry C. Gatz. Whoever he is, he's on his way. Finally, someone is coming. It was Gatsby's father. He'd read about his son's death in the Chicago newspaper and left Minnesota straight away. When he arrives, the poor man is on the point of collapse. Nick shows him into the room where Gatsby's body lay and gives him a moment with his son. Afterwards, he helps Mr. Gatz upstairs to a bedroom where they talk about Gatsby. It isn't long before Mr. Gatz, exhausted from grief and travel, falls asleep. That night, Klipspringer calls. Remember Gatsby's lodger? At first, Nick is happy at the prospect of another person at Gatsby's grave, but Klipspringer only wants his stupid tennis shoes sent to him. Nick hangs up on him. Nick is outraged by everyone's cowardice. On the morning of Gatsby's funeral, he goes to see Wolfsheim in person. He carries on about how he raised Gatsby out of the gutter and how they were always together. Even so, Wolfsheim refuses to attend the funeral, saying that he can't get mixed up in it. Some friend. Back at Gatsby's house, Nick finds Henry Gatz marvelling at his son's achievement. Henry calls his son Jimmy and expresses his fatherly pride. Even as a child, Gatsby was incredibly disciplined and focused, way more than other kids his age. There was no question that he had a bright future ahead of him. Henry shows Nick a handwritten schedule in the back of an old storybook as proof. Gatsby really was something else. At 3 o'clock, the minister comes to preside over Gatsby's funeral. They wait for half an hour, but no one else comes. At the cemetery, one other person does show up, the owl-eyed man from Gatsby's library. Remember him? Of the legion of Gatsby's party guests, Owl Eyes is the only one who has the decency to pay his respects. Soon after this, Nick decides to return home to the Midwest. Before he leaves, Nick has one final meeting with Jordan Baker. It's a breakup. After listening to Nick's harrowing story, she coolly informs him that she's engaged to another guy. She's angry with Nick for not being more attentive to her throughout the whole ordeal. Selfish much? As they part ways, Nick is overcome with anger, regret, and a sense of being half in love with her. Ouch. Soon after this, he runs into Tom Buchanan on the street. Nick refuses to shake his hand, which offends Tom. By this time, Nick had rightly guessed that George Wilson had, at some point on his deranged death march, stopped by Tom's house. Tom openly admits to Nick that he told George the truth. According to Tom, George forced his way into the house and threatened to shoot Tom if he didn't name the owner of the big yellow car. So yeah, of course he gave up Gatsby's name. What's more, Tom thinks Gatsby had it coming for deceiving everyone and for mowing Myrtle down like a dog in the street. It seems that Daisy hasn't told Tom the actual truth. Nick realises that Tom and Daisy are just careless people. They smash things up and then retreat into the safety of their wealth. They always leave other people to clean up their mess. On that note, Nick shakes Tom's hand and they part ways forever. Gatsby's mansion is now empty, a shadow of its former glory. One Saturday night, a single car rolls into Gatsby's driveway, obviously expecting a party. That guy didn't get the memo. On Nick's last night, he wanders over to Gatsby's estate one more time. He sprawls out on the beach and gazes across the dark water. The ambience of the night stirs his imagination. He thinks about the Dutch sailors who discovered Long Island and how they must have felt such breathless wonder at its beauty. Gatsby must have felt the same way when he saw the green light at the end of Daisy's dock. that tantalising beacon of hope. It was just there, almost within reach. But poor Gatsby never realised that his dream already belonged to the past. But Gatsby's not alone in the relentless pursuit of dreams. Perhaps we all have a touch of Gatsby in us, that irresistible urge to strive towards some gorgeous future that's just beyond our reach. Isn't that human nature? To Nick, we're all just like boats, beating against a cruel current that drags us back. After what he's been through, it's not surprising that Nick feels this way. But what do you think? At what point do dreams become a delusion? We hope you enjoyed this Schooling Online production. For more easy lessons, check out our other videos.